I buried my husband believing I'd shared a lifetime with the man I loved, until I found his secret bank transfers and a photograph of him smiling with the woman he never stopped loving, and the son he secretly supported for decades. The rage killed me, literally. But fate gave me a second chance. This time I won't waste my life cooking for a man who saw me as a placeholder. I'll claim the dream I sacrificed, rise higher than they ever imagined, and watch their world crumble without me. I always thought grief would arrive like a storm, loud, chaotic, relentless. But when my husband Lincoln died, it came quietly, like mist creeping through the cracks in a door. There was no grand breakdown, no tearful collapse. Just silence. A silence so thick it wrapped around my chest and held me still. For 3 days I moved through our home like a shadow. I cooked meals I didn't eat. I turned on the TV and forgot to watch. His slippers remained by the bed, unmoved. His cologne sat half empty on the dresser. And every morning, I woke expecting to hear him grumble from the kitchen that the water wasn't hot enough for his tea. But this morning I decided I would finally begin. Clean out his things. It felt like something the widow of a decorated army man ought to do. Proper. Respectful. I started with the cedar trunk at the foot of our bed. It had always been his space, the one place I never touched, never questioned. Inside were folded uniforms, medals dulled by dust, yellowing letters, and a stack of old bank folders tied with twine. One folder slipped free and landed in my lap. A thin, unmarked thing. Harmless looking. I opened it, and that's when the ground shifted. Inside were years' worth of bank transfer receipts. Neat, consistent, meticulous. All from Lincoln. All to the same woman. Yvonne Gray. The name hit me like a slap. I hadn't heard it in decades, but I knew it. Everyone did. Lincoln's first love. The ballerina with porcelain skin and sugar-spun lies. The one who had married his army friend. The one he said was just a memory. But memories don't have bank accounts. And certainly not ones that received half a man's salary month after month. For over 20 years. My hands trembled as I flipped through the stack. My vision blurred, but the number stayed clear. $1,500. $1,500. $1,500. Always the same amount. Always regular. And I, his wife, had been clipping coupons and pretending not to notice when he forgot birthdays. And then came the photo. It was wedged between the final receipts like a cruel punchline. Lincoln stood beside Yvonne, his arm draped around her shoulders. Between them, a boy, around 8 or 9, smiling up at Lincoln like he was the center of the world. Mason, I would learn later. Yvonne's son. Lincoln's son. I dropped the photo as if it had burned me. The silence in the room suddenly became unbearable. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. My chest tightened, my vision narrowed. I tried to stand, but the weight of the betrayal knocked the air from my lungs. I stumbled to the living room and collapsed onto the couch, the folder clutched in my lap. I sat there frozen for what felt like hours. And then came the knock. I didn't answer. So they let themselves in. The door swung open with a confident creak, and in walked Yvonne Gray, exactly as I remembered her. Not a day older than the last time I saw her, though I knew that wasn't true. She wore a cream coat cinched tightly at the waist, red lipstick perfectly applied, and an expression that danced somewhere between sympathy and entitlement. Behind her stood Mason, tall and broad-shouldered, the mirror image of Lincoln in his youth. Next to him, a younger woman, his wife I assumed, chewing gum with bored disdain, phone already out as if my home were beneath her attention. I didn't rise to greet them. I couldn't. Yvonne offered a saccharine smile. Natalie. We should talk. I said nothing. She walked in anyway, as if she had done it 1,000 times before. As if this home, my home, already belonged to her. You've seen the will, haven't you? She asked, cocking her head. I imagine it must have been quite a shock. I wanted to scream. But the rage had settled into something colder. Heavier. I see you haven't changed a bit, I said quietly. I've changed quite a lot actually, she replied, brushing invisible dust off her coat. Raising a child alone changes you. But Lincoln did his part. At least financially. Mason crossed his arms. We're here to discuss the house. I blinked. I beg your pardon? The will states half of Lincoln's assets go to me and Mason, Yvonne said, her tone now clipped. And that includes this house. We'll be moving in, temporarily of course, until the estate finalizes. No, I said simply. Yvonne smiled like she pitied me. I understand this is difficult, Natalie. But it's not about you anymore. This house was never just yours. Lincoln and I. You and Lincoln were never married, I snapped. Legally, no, she said unfazed. But emotionally, spiritually, you were the placeholder. Her words stung more than I expected. Mason stepped forward, impatient. Mom, don't waste time. She's stalling. Just tell her we need the master bedroom and the study. His wife chimed in from the corner, not even looking up from her phone. Honestly, I don't know why we're still talking. Just pack her stuff and move it. She can have the guest room. I looked around the living room. The photos of Lincoln and me on the walls. The embroidered cushions I'd hand-stitched. The antique lamp I'd begged him not to buy but later learned to love. They were already rearranging it all with their eyes. Get out, I whispered. Yvonne looked almost pleased. Oh, Natalie. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The will is clear. Mason has rights now. You're welcome to stay. We just need to restructure the living arrangements. I laughed. Actually laughed. I buried my husband 3 days ago. And now you want to divide up our home like we're splitting groceries. It's what Lincoln wanted, Mason said coolly. You wouldn't want to disrespect his wishes, would you? I stood. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself up. You think you can just walk in here and claim his life? After all I gave up for him? Yvonne sighed. Look, you were the wife in title. I was the woman he truly loved. You had the name. I had the heart. Let's not pretend you didn't know. Mom, stop explaining, Mason said. Just call the lawyer. Why bother? His wife added with a sneer. She'll probably keel over from the stress. I turned to face them, but the room tilted suddenly. I clutched my chest. The pain struck hard, like someone had shoved a hot iron into my ribs. My knees buckled. The room spun. My vision darkened at the edges. Yvonne's voice grew distant, like she was calling from the bottom of a well. Natalie. I stumbled backward, knocking over a side table. The photo of our wedding fell and shattered. But all I could hear was my heart hammering in my ears. Fast, frantic, desperate. My legs gave out. I collapsed. And the last thing I saw was Yvonne reaching for me, not with concern, but with annoyance. I was 16 again. The smell of chalk dust and old books drifted through the air as I sat frozen at my worn-out wooden desk. Around me, the night school classroom buzzed with muted excitement, but I could barely hear it over the pounding of my own heartbeat. Emily Cross, Mr. Harris called, his voice shaking slightly with pride. Congratulations. You've been accepted to Northbridge Medical University. Emily. That name again. It echoed through the room, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. I had lived a whole life since I last heard it. I had grown old, loved, been betrayed, and died with bitterness clenched in my chest. Yet here I was, reborn in my 16-year-old body. Same school. Same teacher. Same moment I had once thought was the start of everything good. Only this time I wasn't going to throw it all away for a man who never truly saw me. Mr. Harris beamed as he walked over to my desk, holding out the letter with both hands like it was the Holy Grail. You're the first girl from this school to make it to university, he said, placing it gently on my desk. We're all so proud of you. I took the letter with trembling fingers, heart roaring in my ears. The envelope was thick and official. My name typed neatly on the front. I ran my thumb across the seal and felt a wave of emotion swell up in my throat. It was real. This letter, this moment, was mine. And I would not let anyone take it from me this time. Mr. Harris. I forced my voice steady. Could I ask a favor? He paused, surprised. Of course. Please don't tell anyone. Not even the staff. His brow furrowed. Why not? I met his eyes. I'm afraid someone might try to take my spot. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. This will stay between us. I stood from my desk, cradling the letter to my chest as if it were a newborn, and walked out of the classroom into the cool autumn air. The leaves crunched beneath my shoes as the streetlights flickered overhead. The weight of 2 lives pressed down on me. One I had already lived, full of regret and silence. The other, a blank page begging for ink. I slipped behind the school, down the narrow path that led to the grove of pine trees. This was the place I used to come when I couldn't breathe. And now it was the only place I could cry. I sank to the ground, still clutching the letter. The tears came hard and fast. I cried for the years I had lost. For the dreams I had buried beneath someone else's ambition. For the woman I had been, so eager to please, so willing to wait, so desperate to be chosen. I had given Lincoln everything. My youth, my trust, my life. And he gave his heart to someone else. Not again. This time I would walk a different path. Even if it meant walking it alone. When I got home that night, the house was quiet. My mother's sewing machine hummed faintly from the back room. My younger brother, Teddy, was asleep on the couch with a book on his chest. Everything looked the same. But I wasn't. I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and slid the envelope beneath the loose floorboard under my bed. In my past life I had left it on the dining table. Lincoln had seen it, frowned, and said, "That's pretty far away." I had mistaken that for love. That hesitance, that worry. I had thought he didn't want to be apart from me. I had been so touched, so moved, I let go of my dream without hesitation. Now I saw it for what it was, control wrapped in faux concern. I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. My mother blinked in surprise when she saw me making breakfast. "You're chipper today," she said. "Just thought I'd help out," I replied, flipping the eggs with ease. "You got any good news?" she asked, sipping her tea. I smiled faintly. Maybe. I didn't tell her about the letter. Not yet. Because I knew Lincoln would be coming by soon. Sure enough, just past noon, a knock echoed from the front door. I opened it to find him, young Lincoln, clean-shaven, bright-eyed, and smiling like he had the world figured out. Just as I remembered him from before the bitterness, before the obligations wore him down. And still my stomach turned. "Natalie," he said, his voice warm. "You got time to come for a walk?" Natalie. I had always loved how he said my name. But now it felt like a script I didn't want to be in. "I have errands," I replied coolly. His smile faltered just a little. "Maybe later then?" I nodded once and shut the door. My heart raced, not from nerves but from power. From the knowledge that he no longer owned me. Later that afternoon, while cleaning up the family study, I found something that made my blood run cold. Tucked under a stack of newspapers on my father's desk was a familiar sheet of paper. An official military marriage application. I pulled it out slowly. It was blank. In my last life, Lincoln had told me he submitted this 6 months before. That our marriage would be registered soon. But now I knew he had never turned it in. He was waiting. Waiting to see if Yvonne Gray, his beloved first love, would come back. And she did. Right on cue. 6 months ago to the day, she had returned to town with her son, seeking shelter. Lincoln dropped everything to help her. I had stayed home, giddy over preparing his favorite meal to celebrate his supposed promotion. He had lied. That night I had waited for hours. He never came home. When he finally called, he told me he had to pull an overnight shift. I believed him. Now, standing there with the unsigned marriage form in my hand, I wanted to scream. I didn't. Instead, I struck a match. The flames licked the edges of the paper, curling the corners into ash. I watched it burn in a metal dish on the kitchen table, arms crossed, heart pounding. "Good riddance," I whispered. That evening, just after sunset, the door creaked open. I was in the middle of washing vegetables for dinner when I heard the familiar voice. "Natalie," Lincoln called. "Did you make the pork and chive dumplings I asked for? Mason's hungry." I turned around slowly. And there they were. Yvonne standing beside Lincoln, her hands resting on Mason's shoulders. A picture-perfect family portrait. I said nothing at first. "What's that smell?" Lincoln asked, sniffing the air. "Were you burning something?" "Just something that doesn't matter anymore," I said coldly. Yvonne tilted her head. "Natalie, we didn't mean to drop by unannounced. We just thought." "You thought what?" I asked. "That I'd make dinner for your son?" Lincoln shifted uncomfortably. "You said you'd cook. You know how picky Mason is." Mason began to wail on cue. "I'm hungry. I want dumplings." Lincoln looked exasperated. "Natalie, can you just—" "He called you Daddy," I said flatly, watching both of them freeze. Yvonne's eyes widened in mock innocence. "He's just a child. I've told him not to," but Lincoln said. "There's no need to correct him," Lincoln interrupted, his voice tight. "I've decided to take Mason in as my godson. He's already like family." I laughed. Out loud. "You can have him call you Emperor if you want. It's none of my business," Lincoln's face hardened. Natalie, what's with the attitude? I shrugged. I was tired. Didn't feel like cooking. You knew Mason was coming. And I still didn't cook. The silence that followed was glorious. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward my room. Natalie, Lincoln called. I'm not your maid, I said without turning back. And I'm done playing the fool. I had always thought that homes could hold memories, that walls could absorb laughter, pain, whispers. But standing in my own living room with strangers lounging on my furniture, I realized something far crueler. Homes can be stolen. One silent intrusion at a time. It started with a dress. A bright floral sundress, draped across the armrest of the couch. The same couch I had spent 3 months saving up for in my first life. The same couch where Lincoln and I once sat side by side, shelling peanuts and pretending our world was quiet and simple. Now Yvonne's scent clung to it, sweet, floral, foreign. Her son Mason had scattered toys across the living room. Wooden blocks, spinning tops, even a red toy car that screeched each time it was rolled. The sound grated against my nerves, relentless. In the bathroom, her face creams occupied the top shelf of the vanity, the very shelf I had always kept spare for guests. The second I saw the silver jar labeled Anti-Wrinkle Revive, I slammed the cabinet door shut. Yvonne's presence was everywhere. Mine, fading like chalk in the rain. I stood in the doorway to the spare room, my spare room, only to find it transformed. Bright red bedsheets, cartoon pillows, a pink teddy bear slumped in the corner. Mason's wife, who hadn't bothered to introduce herself, had taped a photo of herself and Mason to the mirror, right over the one of Lincoln and me at the town fair. I stared at that photo for a long time. Not because it meant anything, but because it didn't. That evening I sat quietly at the dinner table. Lincoln had cooked 2 dishes and a soup. Nothing like my elaborate meals, but passable. They all sat eating, chatting, laughing like they owned the air itself. No one noticed I hadn't picked up my chopsticks. Not until Mason's wife, Alyssa, apparently, snorted and said, "She's really not going to eat? What is this, a hunger strike?" Lincoln gave me a tight smile. "Natalie, what's going on? You've been acting strange." Strange? Yes, I suppose I was acting strange, for a woman who used to smile while being erased. "I'm just tired," I said simply. He frowned. "You used to smile more." I looked him straight in the eye. "I used to believe you loved me." The words dropped like stones into a still pond. Mason stopped mid-chew. Yvonne blinked. Alyssa rolled her eyes. Lincoln looked like I'd slapped him. Natalie, I do care about you. That hasn't changed." I stood pushing my chair back. "You know," I said softly, "I used to think this house was mine. That I had built it, maintained it, made it warm. But now." I looked around. Yvonne was pouring Mason another spoonful of soup. Alyssa was texting. Lincoln was trying not to meet my eyes. Now I realize I was just renting space in a life you were building with someone else. I left the table. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled laughter echoing through the hallway. My fingers itched. My brain raced. And when dawn finally broke, I got up and began packing. Not suitcases. No. That would be too obvious. I didn't want Lincoln suspecting anything. Instead, I gathered things slowly, deliberately. My old textbooks. My medical prep notes. A tattered copy of Gray's Anatomy. A scarf I had knitted last winter but never wore. I wrapped them all in newspaper and tucked them beneath the floorboard. The next day, I took the old shoe sole I'd been stitching and sold it to the local junk dealer for 20 cents. It wasn't much, but I planned to sell everything I could. Books. Handcrafted scarves. Even my second-hand sewing machine if I had to. That afternoon, Lincoln handed me $100. "Here," he said awkwardly. "For the TV. I know you said Sarah. Sorry, Yvonne, should pay, but she's a little tight right now." I counted the money slowly. "You didn't ask her for it, did you?" I said flatly. He hesitated. No. "But does it matter?" It did. It mattered more than he could imagine. But I smiled and tucked the money into my pocket. "Thanks." Over the next week I sold almost everything I owned. The scarf I had planned to give Lincoln on his next birthday? Gone for 75 cents. My old calligraphy brushes? Gone. Every little thing I had once clung to in my first life, I now stripped away like a second skin. I was peeling myself down to the essentials. Freedom. money, a plan. That was all I needed. One afternoon, Lincoln came home early and stood in the doorway, squinting at the wall. "Our photo's missing," he said. "I broke the frame. The picture got ruined," I replied casually. "Oh," he said, looking oddly disappointed. "You'll replace it?" "No." He didn't ask again. 2 nights before my planned departure, something bizarre happened. Yvonne burst into the house, face pale. "There's a rat," she cried, "in my place. Mason's terrified. Natalie, please." I blinked. "You don't live here." "Well, we're technically between places right now," she said quickly. Lincoln said it'd be all right. I turned to him. He looked sheepish. "Just for the night." Of course. Of course he wouldn't say no to her. "I'll sleep in your room tonight," she said quickly. "Promise I won't touch anything." I didn't argue. I just gathered my few remaining things and went to sleep on the couch. The next morning, Lincoln knocked gently on the frame of the doorway. "Natalie." I sat up. I was thinking." He held out 2 pieces of paper. "Movie tickets. Your birthday's in 2 days. Thought maybe we could see Romance on Lucan Mountain together." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. That same film he refused to take me to in our last life. The same one I had begged to see. He had always been too busy. Too tired. Too broke. Now when I had one foot out the door, he remembered. I took the tickets. "Sure." His smile was tentative, unsure. "Great. It's a date then." "No," I said, walking past him. "It's a goodbye." Later that day, while Yvonne thought I was in the market, I overheard her talking to Mason. "I'm going to bring you back here," she whispered to him. "This is your home, baby. I just have to get rid of her first." I stood silently behind the half-open door, not surprised. Not angry. Just done. That evening, Lincoln knocked on my door with a cassette tape in hand. "Teresa Tang," he said with a smile. "Your favorite." It wasn't. It had always been Yvonne's favorite. He had never known mine. I didn't bother correcting him. The night before the movie, I went to the train station. I purchased a one-way ticket to Northbridge. The earliest train. 4 days and 3 nights of freedom in motion. I returned home, packed the last of my hidden items into a small suitcase and tucked it beneath the couch. Tomorrow after the movie, I would vanish. August 23rd. My birthday. In my first life, Lincoln had forgotten it. Or maybe he hadn't. Maybe he just didn't care enough to remember. But this time he remembered. "Happy birthday," he said awkwardly, holding out a plastic bag as I opened the door. Inside was a cassette tape and a string of candied hawthorn berries. I stared at the bag. "Your favorites," he added, looking proud of himself. Only they weren't. They were Yvonne's. Even now, even when trying, he still got it wrong. "Thanks," I said, taking the bag. He grinned like a schoolboy. "Movie starts at 6. Let's leave early so we get good seats." We left the house just past 5, walking side by side. He wore his faded green army uniform, freshly pressed, the buttons gleaming. I wore the same cream blouse I had worn the day I found out about the affair in my past life. Felt like armor now. We passed the street vendors, the rickety bicycles, and the flower sellers on the corner. Lincoln pointed to one of the stalls. "Want some sweet popcorn for the show?" I shook my head. "You can get some if you want." He nodded and trotted off, already thinking he was winning me back. I stood alone outside the movie theater, staring up at the billboard. Romance on Lucan Mountain. A story of 2 lovers torn apart by war and duty, reunited through fate. How poetic. I was already turning away when I saw her. "Yvonne." She rushed up in a flutter of silk and perfume, panic plastered on her face like a second skin. "Lincoln," she cried, grabbing his hand the second he returned with the popcorn. "It's Mason. He's burning up with fever. I don't know what to do. Please take us to the military hospital." I'm scared." She looked up at him, her voice breaking, tears already clinging to her lashes like carefully arranged accessories. Lincoln's face changed in an instant. From happy anticipation to stunned worry. "Where is he now?" he asked. "At home," she whispered. I didn't know where else to go. He turned to me, guilt already etched into his features. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "You go in first. I'll drop them off and come back. I promise. I'll leave the other ticket at the front desk." I smiled and took the stub from his hand. "Go." "Really?" He looked surprised. It's your godson, isn't it? I said sweetly. His health comes first. His relief was palpable. Thank you, Natalie. I'll be back before the first act ends. But I knew he wouldn't be. Yvonne would make sure of that. I stood at the movie theater door, the usher waiting to scan my ticket. And then I turned around. I didn't go inside. Instead, I walked home with steady feet and a light heart. The suitcase I had hidden beneath the couch was still exactly where I left it. I took out the cassette tape, flipped it over in my hands once and set it on the table. It wasn't even my birthday music. Just noise he assumed I'd like. At 10 p.m. I left the house for the last time. The town was quiet, the street lamps buzzing softly, casting orange halos on the pavement. I spent the night in a cheap inn near the train station. The bed was stiff, the ceiling water-stained, and the faucet sputtered cold water. And yet I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, just past 5 a.m., I boarded the train to Northbridge. It shrieked on the tracks as it pulled out of the station, and I watched the landscape blur past the window. Rice paddies, rolling hills, towns I'd never heard of. Behind me, the past burned in silence. Ahead of me, finally, was everything else. Northbridge Medical University. Those first days passed like a dream. Enrollment was seamless, my paperwork untouched. My dorm was small and shared with 2 other girls who were too busy with their own ambitions to ask questions about my quiet, intense demeanor. I threw myself into my studies. Pharmacology, biology, organic chemistry, clinical rotations. I rarely spoke unless necessary. I stayed in the lab late. I studied by moonlight. I didn't have time to think about Lincoln or Yvonne or Mason. But life, as I learned, had a way of circling back. It was 5 months later, in the heart of winter. Snow clung to the windowsills. The radiators hissed. And I was packing up samples in the lab when my roommate burst through the door. Natalie. Someone's at the front gate. He's asking for you by name. I looked up, puzzled. Who? I don't know. He looks like hell. I put on my coat and stepped out into the freezing air. And there he was. Lincoln Dawson. But not the polished man I remembered. His uniform was rumpled. His hair had grown out. His arm was in a sling. A bandage wrapped around his temple, stained faintly with blood. Looked broken. Emily, Natalie, he corrected quickly. You're here. I said nothing. He staggered forward, his breath hitching. Why did you leave without telling me? I stared at him. What do you mean? He looked stricken. I searched everywhere. I begged your teacher for answers. They told me you'd been accepted to Northbridge. I didn't even know. Why didn't you tell me? I gave a short laugh. You were too busy at the hospital with Yvonne, remember? His face fell. That night, Mason had a high fever. I had no choice. There's always a choice, I said softly. He reached for my hand and I pulled it away. I was going to come see you sooner, he said, desperate now. But I was injured. A landmine during deployment. I couldn't walk for months. I stared at the snow melting into the cracks in the pavement. You didn't even remember who I was the day I received my acceptance letter. You just saw me as convenient. Temporary. He blinked. That's not true. Isn't it? I said, my voice steel. You handed your salary to another woman for 2 decades. You called her son your own. You built your life around her, and then asked me to cook for them. His shoulders slumped. I admit I used to have feelings for Yvonne, he said quietly, but I never stopped loving you. I asked the unit for a transfer to Northbridge. It was approved. He looked up, eyes shining with something like hope. But she didn't let you leave, I finished for him. He nodded. She said if I abandoned her, she'd throw herself in the river with Mason. I didn't know what to do. And you slept with her, I said calmly. Don't bother denying it. I know. His mouth opened and closed. It was a mistake. She drugged me. I stared at him, expression unreadable. And when she got pregnant? I asked. He froze. I see, I said. But you're the one I wanted to marry. Always. Just you. I stepped back. You don't get to say that now, I said. You don't get to rewrite what you broke. His lips trembled. You don't love me anymore, do you? No, I said. And I meant it. I'll request another transfer, he said quickly. I'll come here. You don't belong in my life anymore, Lincoln, I said. Not now. Not ever. His shoulders sagged. I won't stop loving you, he said, voice barely audible. Then that will be your burden, I replied. I turned and walked back inside. He didn't follow. He never came to Northbridge again. I heard rumors that he had been demoted, that he was honorably discharged, that he was forced to marry Yvonne after the scandal with Mason's birth, and that his family eventually tore itself apart. But by then I was no longer the woman who waited for him at the window. I was Natalie Cross, and I had a future worth everything I had lost. Time has a way of revealing all things. In my first life I waited decades to learn the truth. This time I didn't wait, I simply walked away. But even as I rebuilt my life in the quiet corridors of Northbridge Medical, whispers of the past still found me. Not because I sought them, but because karma doesn't need a witness to keep its promises. It was nearly a year after I left when I first heard news of Lincoln. I was eating lunch in the campus canteen, plain rice and steamed greens, the kind of simple meal I'd grown used to in the frugality of student life, when I overheard a conversation between two young Army cadets seated nearby. "Did you hear about Dawson from the 7th Regiment?" one asked. "The one who got into trouble over a woman?" "Yeah. Messy stuff. Real shame. Guy had a bright future. The base had approved his transfer to Northbridge and then boom, scandal." My chopsticks froze midair. I didn't move. Didn't even breathe. "What happened?" the other cadet asked. "They said he was tricked. His old flame drugged him during a farewell dinner. Got pregnant. Threatened to jump into the river with her son if he didn't marry her. Military found out. Total disgrace. Transfer revoked. Demoted 2 ranks." I lowered my bowl and stood slowly, heart oddly still. So, it had happened after all. Yvonne's final trap. The same woman who used tears like silk and lies like perfume had managed to anchor Lincoln forever. And just like that, any lingering piece of sympathy I might have had evaporated. In my dorm that night, I sat by the window as the snow fell in soft, weightless flurries. I lit a small candle beside my desk and opened my research notes. That scandal was none of my business anymore. Not really. Still, I couldn't help but marvel at how fate unfolded. How what I once cried over now seemed so small. That man had drained the essence of my first life. And now, in this second life, he was being drained dry by the very woman he had chosen over me. Fitting, I suppose. The years passed quickly. I completed my degree with honors, was offered a research post at a government laboratory, and before long I found myself traveling across provinces, working on pharmaceutical initiatives meant to treat rare diseases in rural populations. My work consumed me and I let it. It was better than remembering. Better than hoping. I published papers, designed trials, even stood beside dignitaries as we announced breakthroughs that saved lives. My name was printed in journals and whispered with respect in academic circles. And still, sometimes, a shadow of the past drifted into my present. Sometimes that shadow looked like Lincoln. The next time I heard his name, I was attending a medical seminar in my hometown. After my keynote lecture, the village chief approached me backstage looking hesitant. "Comrade Natalie," he said. "There's someone who insists on seeing you. He says he knew you once. From long ago." My blood turned cold. I didn't ask who. I just nodded. He entered slowly, leaning heavily on a cane, clothes worn thin, shoes patched at the soles. His back was hunched. His skin sagged. His hair was nearly gone. But I knew that gait. That face. Even beneath the wear and weathering of time. His eyes were cloudy now, but when they met mine, something flickered. Regret. Recognition. "Emily," he whispered, slipping into the name I had once lived by. "You did it. You made it." I didn't answer. I simply looked at him, at the ghost of a man who had once stood so tall in my life. He limped forward, and when he stood close enough, I noticed his hands were trembling. His voice cracked as he spoke again. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed to see you. One last time." He looked so frail. So human. "Are you all right?" I asked, surprised to hear the softness in my own voice. He gave a hollow chuckle. "No. But that's not new." I hesitated. Then quietly I asked, "What about Yvonne? And Mason?" Something in his face shifted. And then his knees gave out. He collapsed into the chair beside the desk with a weight that wasn't just physical. "Yvonne is gone." "Gone where?" He shook his head. ran off, took what little money was left. With another man. I absorbed that in silence. And Mason? Lincoln's face crumpled. He's gone too. My chest tightened despite everything. Gone how? He looked at me through glassy eyes. He got involved with the wrong people. Gang activity. He was beaten to death in a street fight. I couldn't even recognize his face. The air turned still. I reached for the edge of the desk to steady myself. I tried, he said, his voice cracking. I tried to raise him. But I was never really his father. And she never let me be. There was a long silence. I didn't know what to say. And I realized I didn't need to. Later, as we sat in the quiet of the small village conference room, he turned to me again. I want you to know. I'm sorry. I said nothing. He looked at the floor. If it weren't for me, he said slowly, you would have reached your potential a long time ago. I blinked. What? His hands trembled again as he wiped at his eyes. I was reborn too. My heart stopped. He looked up at me, sorrow etched in every line of his face. That last mission. I was injured. Unconscious for a long time. And while I was out, I saw things. Things I shouldn't have seen. He swallowed hard. I saw your face when you got your college acceptance. I saw the way I crushed that joy. I saw the years I took from you. And I saw you on the floor when your heart gave out. The image slammed into me like thunder. My breath caught. You saw. He nodded. Everything. A beat passed before he whispered, that was when I knew. I never deserved you. I pressed a hand to my chest as if steadying the new heart that beat inside it. I didn't come here to beg, he said. I just wanted you to know. I only ever truly loved one person. You. And there was. The confession I had once begged for in my old life. The truth I had waited decades to hear. Too late. Far too late. I stood and picked up my coat. He looked up at me, panic flaring. Do you hate me? I stared at him for a long time. And then I shook my head. I stopped hating you a long time ago, Lincoln. He closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. I'm glad, he whispered. I walked toward the door. Then paused. You don't need to drown in regret, I said gently. You already paid for your choices. He looked like he might cry again. But I won't carry your remorse for you, I added. That's yours alone. He nodded slowly, understanding. And as I stepped outside into the fading sun, I felt no weight on my shoulders. Only wind. Only forward. Some people believe freedom is a moment. A declaration. A slammed door or a suitcase in hand. But I've come to believe real freedom unfolds quietly. For me, it didn't arrive the day I left Lincoln. It didn't come with the train to Northbridge or even the news of Yvonne's disgrace. It came slowly, like a sunrise over frozen land. It arrived in the clink of beakers in a cold lab at midnight. In the silence of a microscope. In the steady heartbeat of my own ambition. After I left the past behind, I buried myself in my work. And in doing so, I bloomed. By the time I was 32, I had published 6 papers in top-tier pharmaceutical journals. One of my early projects, an antiviral compound derived from wild rhubarb root, had been adopted for nationwide production during a seasonal flu outbreak. By 38, I was heading a research team of 45 scientists. We were based in the outer provinces, tucked away in a government-funded lab nestled between 2 mountain ranges. Our mission was simple on paper but colossal in scope. To develop low-cost drugs that could prolong human life and treat rare diseases neglected by commercial pharmaceutical companies. We worked out of steel containers in snowstorms and humidity. We built centrifuges out of repurposed auto parts. There were days we had no heat. Nights we worked by candlelight. But I had never felt more alive. Each test tube I handled, each formula I rewrote, each breakthrough my team achieved. It all added another brick to a legacy built not for someone else but for me. And it was all mine. I became known in scientific circles for my stubborn precision and relentless standards. Natalie Cross is married to her lab, they'd joke. And I let them. Guess it was true. I wore no ring, bore no husband's name, raised no children. And for once I wasn't pitted for it. I was respected. Envied even. By the time I was in my early 50s, our lab had developed over 100 drug formulas. Some went to market. Others were archived for future pandemics. A few, only a few, were game changers. One was a treatment for a form of leukemia that once only saw a 5% survival rate. Another, a low-cost insulin variant stable without refrigeration, changed lives across rural villages. Recognition came swiftly after that. Awards, medals, photos with ministers and international agencies. My face, once flushed from shame in the corner of Lincoln's dining room, now adorned national newspapers under bold headlines like, "Wife no more, she became a legend of medicine." I never corrected the title, but I always smiled when I saw it. On my 60th birthday, my team threw me a quiet celebration in the courtyard behind our research facility. There was no cake, only dumplings, handmade by my assistant Jia. I stood by the edge of the gravel path, holding a bowl of warm soup, staring up at the stars. So many decades had passed. So much gained. So much lost. And yet not once had I looked back. Not until the invitation arrived. It came in a red envelope hand-delivered by a local official. Inside was a formal letter bearing the seal of the People's Committee for National Contribution and Innovation. Dr. Natalie Cross, we invite you to return to your hometown and deliver a keynote speech at this year's National Uplift Symposium. Your work has improved the lives of millions and inspired generations of researchers. We wish to honor you where your journey first began. The words blurred as I read them, not from tears but from disbelief. My hometown, the place I once fled from like a burning house, was now welcoming me back. Not as a widow. Not as a discarded woman. But as someone who had built a legacy that could never be erased. I arrived a week later. The roads were no longer muddy. They were smooth asphalt now, lined with street lamps and colorful flower beds. The crumbling houses had been replaced with tiled roof villas, solar panels glinting in the sun. I walked through the village square and saw girls in school uniforms with backpacks bearing the Northbridge Medical logo. I smiled. The speech went well. There were flowers, applause, and honorary plaque I didn't have room to carry. But none of that meant as much as what happened after. A man approached me. Thin. Gray. His posture slightly bent. His hands trembling. Took me a second to recognize him. Mr. Wei, the old village chief. Natalie, he said, nearly breathless, there's someone who insists on seeing you. I knew before he said it. Lincoln. He came slowly, leaning on a cane. His military coat hung awkwardly on his frail shoulders. He looked older than his years, exhausted not just from time but from the weight of regret. When his eyes met mine, I saw it all. He knew. He had watched the world rise around me while his own crumbled beneath him. I saw your name in the papers, he said. I clipped everyone. I said nothing. His voice cracked. I wanted to say thank you. For not letting my failure destroy you. He lowered his head. And when he looked back up, he whispered, I never deserved the life you gave me. But I prayed that this time you'd find one without me. I took a deep breath. The bitterness had long since died. So had the love. What remained was something quieter, detached, distant, but not cruel. You were right, I said. I did find it. Without you. He nodded slowly. I know. We stood there for a long moment in silence. Then I turned to leave. He called out once more. Do you hate me? I turned back, the breeze catching my scarf. I don't hate you, I said. But I don't remember loving you anymore either. That part of me is gone. His lips trembled. I offered him a final gift. A soft, simple truth. And that's okay. I returned to the capital on a cold morning, the city still groggy with sleep. The train pulled in just past 4 a.m., its whistle echoing faintly in the quiet dark. I stepped out alone, wheeling a small suitcase behind me. No reporters. No assistants. No medals. Just me as I'd always been when it mattered most. A new research phase was waiting. Something about a protein synthesis trial I'd been overseeing remotely while away. There were reports on my desk. Letters waiting to be answered. Invitations to conferences I hadn't yet declined. But none of that felt urgent now. What I'd left behind in that village wasn't just Lincoln's apology. It was the last piece of a past life I no longer belonged to. I spent the following weeks in quiet. No lectures. No press. Just my work, my plants, my walks in the courtyard outside my home. Some evenings I'd sit with a cup of tea watching the light dim across the skyline. And I'd think not about Lincoln. Not about Yvonne. But about the girl I once was. The girl in threadbare slippers, walking home from the military base with her stomach half full and her heart half shattered. The girl who thought love meant enduring. The girl who believed being chosen was the highest form of self-worth. How small her world had been. How wide mine had become. One morning I received a letter. It was handwritten in careful strokes. To Dr. Natalie Cross. We regret to inform you that Mr. Lincoln Dawson passed away peacefully in his sleep last Sunday. There was no family listed on record. Your name was the only contact found in his personal belongings. In accordance with his final request, we are sending a parcel containing the contents of his bedside drawer. He asked that it reach you if possible. It was signed by the warden of a veterans' rest home on the outskirts of the province. I sat still for a long time. I hadn't expected tears. And none came. When the package arrived, I opened it in the privacy of my study. Inside were a few old photos, mostly of Mason as a child. A worn pocket watch. A dog-eared copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. And tucked in the middle a small folded sheet of yellowing paper. It was a letter. Oi. Or Natalie. I suppose you belong to her more now than you ever did to me. I don't know where you are when you read this. Maybe you're somewhere grand doing something brilliant. Maybe you've long forgotten the man who once stood beside you and never really saw you. But if you haven't, if there's even a trace of me in your memory, I wanted to say this one last time. I was a fool. A coward. And still, even now, I believe I loved you in the only way I knew how. Pretty. Imperfectly. But with something real. You were never just a wife. You were never someone's supporting act. You were always the main story. I was simply too blind to know I was reading a masterpiece. I hope you lived the life you deserved. I hope it was beautiful. Lincoln. I folded the letter gently, placed it back in the envelope and tucked it away in the bottom drawer of my cabinet. It didn't need framing. It didn't need burning either. It was a relic. Nothing more. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a global summit on medical innovation. It would be my last keynote. I knew it. And so did the world. Journalists whispered about retirement. Colleagues asked about protégés. One young reporter cornered me backstage before the speech and asked the inevitable question. Dr. Cross, what drove you all these years? What kept you going when things got hard? I smiled. And then I answered honestly. I was underestimated, I said. That's what saved me. She blinked. Saved you? Yes, I nodded. If they had loved me better, I might have stayed small. That final speech made headlines. Not because of its data charts or statistics, but because of the closing line. I was once known as someone's wife. But my legacy is not that I stayed. It's that I left and built something greater. I retired quietly the following winter. Moved to a quiet coastal town where the sea met cliffs and the air smelled like salt and memory. My neighbors didn't know my full name. Just Dr. Nat, who always left her windows open and played old violin records on Sunday mornings. I spent my days tending to my garden, helping local clinics when needed, and occasionally writing reflections for scientific journals. I was peaceful. Not because the world had owed me peace, but because I'd earned it. One evening, as the tide pulled out and the horizon turned molten gold, I sat with a cup of chamomile on my porch. A little girl from next door came running up to hand me a drawing. A stick figure woman in a lab coat with stars around her head. It's you, she said shyly. I smiled. Why the stars? Because you're the hero, she said simply, then skipped away. I looked at the drawing again, and I knew. This was what it had all led to. Not revenge. Not justice. But quiet recognition. From a world that finally saw me as I had always been. Whole. Capable. Enough. They say the best revenge is living well. I disagree. The best revenge is never needing revenge at all. It's becoming so complete, so healed, so filled with life, that even the people who broke you become footnotes in your story. I am not someone's widow. I am not someone's tragedy. I am Natalie Cross. And I lived well. I loved wisely. And I left with no regrets. The end.